Hello, dear guest. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Would you start by sharing your name and your pronouns, please?
Yeah. My name is Koda, and my pronouns are he, they.
Awesome. And where in the world are you?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Awesome. And would you say something about how you discovered you were neurodivergent? How that journey looked like?
That actually kind of ties a bit into today's topic, actually. I know when I reached out to you, I brought up the main aspect of the grief was my mom, who I lost back in 2021. My mom was my rock. She was the one person in my life, in my family specifically, and honestly, there's really only been a few people in my life as a whole that have truly, without a doubt, and it's not even toward anyone else, I have issues with wording things a lot of the time. So like, especially if I'm in heightened emotional state or whatever,
Yeah.
I have always struggled with that. And my mom was the only person that no matter what, it didn't matter. And 9 times out of 10, honestly, she could just tell something was up, you know? It was one of those situations. So, going back to the original question though, I was actually kind of lucky in a sense. I will always say I was very, 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 very privileged in how I grew up. I grew up in a home where mental health and emotional, all of it was very talked about, very recognized. I don't know if you've ever seen Roseanne.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my family growing up. The dysfunctional chaos, but the also flip side of that was no matter what, family is family. You've got your back, you are family. It doesn't matter if there are arguments going on long term, whatever. Shit happens, shit hits the fan. Family's there as much as they can be. You know, that being said, she knew something wasn't right from infancy. My entire immediate family has told me stories and continues to tell stories about how whenever I was like 6 months ish old, I think it started, I would have what my family called breath holding spells. And I've done a bit of research fairly recently, and apparently that's fairly common in infants, I guess, but it can be a sign of other issues. But from
So
the
is that what it sounds like? Is it just you literally holding your breath? Or is it a
uh
forgetting to breathe thing?
from what my family said and from the little bit of research I have actually done on it, apparently it's essentially when infants, specifically infants, like around the 6 month, 9 month, under a year old age, give or take. Infants, their only source of communication is crying. However, apparently there are times where something happens or they have such a big emotion that the brain literally essentially short circuits and forgets to breathe. And essentially what happens, I guess, and what happened with me, was I would cry and cry and cry until I literally started to turn blue.
Mm-hmm.
And
That
then,
sounds dangerous.
oh, yeah, but essentially, apparently, and this is from the research I've done, apparently, when those instances happen, you're essentially supposed to just make sure that the baby is like, keep an eye on them, keep them kind of, try and get them back calm down and stuff, but eventually, essentially, the survival reflex will kick on, essentially, and it'll kind of, hey, we need to breathe kind of
Right.
deal thing, kind of like if you put a baby in water, they'll around that age, they'll float, essentially, without knowing how to float. They'll just survival instinct. That's kind of a lot of the time how parents will start to teach kids, babies specifically, how to like breathe in water. That same concept. But anyway, I was actually diagnosed around 7 or 8 years old with both ADHD and autism, same trip or whatever, same time. How I got diagnosed was, I essentially grew up in mental health, and my first inpatient stay was at 7 or 8 when I got diagnosed. That's where I got diagnosed.
Could you say something about what happened?
Put it this way. And this is kind of going back to the breath holding thing I was saying about. Essentially, that lasted from like 6 months-ish to a year and a half-ish. And then that went from about a year and a half-ish to led into anger and aggression. I was, yeah. To put it bluntly, my mom at the time when this whole situation happened, I was like, again, 7 or 8. I was in the middle of a meltdown, and at the time we didn't know what it was, but yet my mom had this way of carefully restraining me, but also helping me calm down at the same time. I don't know if there's a word for it, but it was like arms over arms, legs over legs, kind of back bear hug kind of deal thing, I am very much a pressure sensory seeker in that aspect. I've always loved bear hugs. I've always loved, just things like that. So that really does help. And especially whenever I was a kid, whenever I would have bad meltdowns, that was a really common way to kind of help calm me down, but also help keep me and others around me safe, because you name it, I've probably done it. Thrown shoes, hit, bit, thrown folding chair at one point. Yeah, again, anger and aggression is not my finest moments.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what landed me inpatient that first time was my mom had me in that kind of restraint, and essentially trying to get out of the restraint, doing anything and everything in that moment that I could, do or whatever. And one of the things that happened was I back headbutted my mom. Thing is, my mom wore glasses, and my mom also wore metal frame with the nose pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I back headbutted, it essentially cut her forehead up from the force. And she ended up going to the ER. I don't remember if she needed stitches or not. I don't remember if it was precautionary both on her end and mine. I don't know. I don't remember. But point is, I ended up getting put inpatient for the first time at 7 or 8 years old, and that's essentially how I got diagnosed with both ADHD and autism.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Did the diagnosis end up being helpful for you? Was that a turning point?
Oh, yeah. I will say this much. Don't think I really understood it then. I don't think I really kind of understood what it meant at all, really, until, like, I hit maybe 10, 11-ish, give or take, around the puberty-ish age, I guess, is where I kind of, at least from my memory, kind of started to realize not everyone else is like this, I react to different. But another thing you should probably, it's not unique, but I have only met a handful of people in my life that have ever actually been diagnosed with this specific type, because at the time it was still the DSM-3 hadn't, that all those changes hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
This was early 2000s. My official diagnosis is PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And the way I've always described it is essentially, if you were to take a whole bunch of different types or aspects of autism, whether it be classic I hate these phrasings, but it's the only way I've ever been able to really explain it. So, forewarning on that. I do not agree with the phrasings themselves, but it's literally how I've always worded it, and I don't know any other way to word it. So, like classic or Asperger's or whatever, but not enough of one specific to say classic or Asperger's or whatever. And that being said, I have always been very, I guess you could say I'm naturally masked. I naturally pass as neurotypical for the most part, day to day. The only real outward, I guess, day-to-day sign that you would have that something might not be quite right with me is my speech in and of itself. As you can tell, I've always had a very slowed speech in pace, but I also have a slight speech impediment as well, which used to be a lot worse. But yeah, so I lost my train of thought on that.
You mentioned that you were masking a fair amount, and I was curious how that shows up for you in kind of your day-to-day life.
Yeah, like I was saying, honestly, I guess you could call it unintentional masking a lot, because a lot of the time what happens is I just get pegged, honestly, as, like, not necessarily full neurotypical, but, like, because, like I said, like, I open my mouth and you can tell something's a little off there with just how I speak. But a lot of the time, because of how I'm a huge bookworm, I've always had a large vocabulary. I realized recently, over the last number of years, I'm a verbal processor as well. So with that, I talk. Like, and a lot of the time how I talk is from, like, my vocabulary has always been, again, large, and just the simple fact that I get pegged a lot of the time as very, I hate this phrasing, very high functioning. And for the most part, again, hate the phrasing, but for the most part, I am, However, I do have my struggles, and I guess the masking, so to speak, would be more on the how I get pegged a lot, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to, like, get help with something, or gone to an assessment of some sort, or gone to this or that, and 2 minutes in the office, mind you, I am so used to these types of situations, whether it be mental health, whether it be, I have a not full script, but I autopilot a lot in those situations, because I am so used to being in them. So I know, okay, this is what's going to be asked. I need to make sure I say this, that kind of thing. So in those situations, I get 2 minutes in the office, 2 minutes over the phone, whatever. And a lot of the time it's, I'm sorry, I don't think you qualify. But we do have this XYZ program that you can do for, that's half of what I actually need and then requesting, that honestly would take more energy out of me than the actual assistance I'm requesting would,
Right. Yeah.
I've legitimately had, in one of my inpatient stays, I have legitimately had a staff member, and by the way, this interaction to this day pisses me the ever-loving hell off. I have always had issues with, while I am very verbal most of the time, I do have my moments where I go completely nonverbal. A lot of the time it's due to severe sensory overload or PTSD related or, things like that. However, I was in, again, one of the inpatient stays I had just a few years ago, I think this was. The place I was at had, one of the groups they had was music therapy. I think it was music therapy. It was something with music, okay? And something was played, a song or something was played in said group that completely set me off. I don't fully remember offhand what the specifics of it was, but point is, I went completely nonverbal. And I'm used to these situations. If I have access to my phone, I always, no matter what phone I have on, I always have an app on my phone that's a text-to-speech app for that. Always. It's the same one every time. It's always in a very specific spot on my phone, just in case, However, being around pre-major technology, like that, I also I'm used to writing things down if I need to,
Yeah.
Very short, whenever I get like that, it's usually very short and simple phrasing too. Something like, went nonverbal, this is why, or something like that, So I wrote that down to show one of the staff members, just to say, as a way to say, hey, this is what's going on, just so you guys are aware. I just kind of have to ride this out,
Yeah.
The staff member that I showed this to, I legitimately looked at me dead in the face and said, I know you can talk. I've heard you talk. Essentially, stop bullshitting me.
Was this somebody who works at a center that has a lot of autistic folks there?
It was just a regular inpatient facility, but he knew I was autistic.
Right. Wow. That's
yeah.
That's pretty special. I'm sorry that happened to you. What is the app you have on standby to do
it is
text to voice?
Yeah. Let me offhand. I think it's called My Voice, and you can. It's really cool because if you have for very common phrases and things specific that you say that you use a lot when you're like that, you can program it, pre-type shit in to where all you have to do is press and it'll play it back, play it out.
What kind of phrases would you have programmed? Like, I've gone nonverbal or something like that?
Whatever. You literally type it in, yeah. And what it'll do is it'll essentially save it as like pinned phrases, kind of deal thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you have any pinned phrases that you have programmed, or do you use it not that often?
I used to. I used to have phrases that I would type with pre-save kind of deal thing, but honestly anymore I've just found it a lot easier at this point to just simple words and just, the less brain power I have to use to word, and the better.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So I'm curious, the thing we got to talking about, and the reason why I invited you on the podcast was grief, and specifically talking about how that intersects with autism. And I find myself being really curious about that. And yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit about your story and how you perceive grief and how it might be different for you as somebody who's autistic.
Yeah, it's the weird part about it is my mom was not my first significant death in my life. My grandma was actually a year before, which my reactions between my grandma and my mom were so different. To be fair, my grandma was my first, not my first death in my life, but my first, significant death in my life. So I really didn't. It was one of those things where I think I was overthinking it. Honestly, I was trying to figure out, well, am I supposed to be reacting this way? Why am I not? I should be reacting, right? I should be, that whole thought process. With my mom, it was rough because it was not just my mom at the time. It started with my mom, and my mom was the only, actual death I had at that point. But the grief, I lost my mom, and like I said, on March 13th, 2021. I had been in a relationship with my now ex. We were 6 years at the time living, 6 years together and 2 living together. He was my longest at that point and most serious relationship I'd ever had. We had been engaged once, he was the first one I lived with, kind of deal thing. And so I lose my mom on the 13th of March. That not more than a month or so later, my now ex tells me that he thinks he wants to take a break. Not a breakup. We had our fair share of breaks. We'd never broken up, but definitely had our fair share of breaks. At the time, I had been admitted inpatient because of the shit I was dealing with, the loss of my mom and everything. Timing wasn't the best, but essentially, like I said, I was inpatient, and at some point while I was inpatient, we were on the phone together, me and my ex, and I knew something felt off. It felt different than times in the past when we had needed space or taken breaks or whatever. So I asked him point blank, I'm like, does this feel like, this feels like more of a break up? Is this a break up, or is this just a break? He told me it was a break up, and the reason I mentioned timing was, again, I was inpatient, so my time is non-existent in an inpatient facility. If you've ever been in one, you know that time is non-existent, especially if you're as time blind as I normally am.
Mm-hmm.
So I did not realize the date it was, but it was Mother's Day when that conversation happened.
Mm-hmm.
In his defense, he did not want to tell me right then for that reason. But he also knew me. He knew that because I wouldn't let it go, and it would just be more of an issue, you know. So fast forward, I end up getting out, and I go back to the apartment we shared temporarily, at least, to figure shit out. We do the cohabitation thing for a little bit. That ends up not working. And I end up moving from North Carolina, where I moved to be with him, to Pennsylvania, back to my home state of PA. And was initially staying with a friend of mine. My own mental health at that point in time was not the best. It was not. I love my friend to death, but this friend of mine and me, it's one of those situations where I love them to death, but us trying to cohabitate together doesn't normally work on a good day.
Right.
You know, it drains me too much, and always ends up in some sort of temporary falling out. You know, and we've tried this 3 times now. But essentially, I ended up leaving their place not more than a month later, which started my 2-year, I think, long chronic homeless situation. I bounced from shelter to shelter, state to state. I've been in Philly, Baltimore, DC area, Maryland, NYC, Jersey for a little bit. Was up here in Pittsburgh a few times before landed the apartment currently I'm in. But between shelter life, couch surfing, and a few times literally on the streets, as somebody who is, again, not only dealing with massive grief, not just the death of my mom, but the loss of the longest, most serious relationship I had had up to that point, and the just general loss of stability as a whole with being homeless, and you add on to that, at the beginning of that year, beginning of 2021, I had just got diagnosed with BPD as well. So I was very much dealing with trying to unpack and go through and figure out what that exactly looked like for me, and it was not a fun.
Sounds like a lot.
Oh yeah, it was not a fun few years. Not at all.
Yeah. What happened to get you to where you are now? It sounds like something shifted.
A few things, actually. One of the first things that I have said and will say for a long time to come, something to note is I grew up a lot. Like, I essentially sat with myself, which is something that I have always struggled with. I've always unintentionally or intentionally in certain situations ran. And for a while there, I was running, whether I realized it or not. For a while there, I just, again, state to state, area to area, place to place, that's literally running.
Yeah.
What changed?
When you say sitting with yourself, what does that mean in this context?
I guess the best way to explain is to go into what I was about to say, which was what changed with the first chunk that changed. The second time around that I had attempted New York City. Now, the reason I say it second time around is because I had briefly attempted it and then ended up going to a shelter in Jersey and then coming back or whatever. But NYC was the longest place I had stayed in that time period. I was actually trying to put down roots. I was trying to get my shit together. More than that, even at that point, I had a lot of growth to do. When I say I sat with myself, though, that comes into play at the end of 2022. I think it was 2022. No. I think it was 2022. I think I had ended up testing positive for COVID. And because I was homeless in New York City at that time, and therefore staying at shelters, what they had at least in NYC at the time, was anyone who tested positive ended up getting quarantined, and they like put you up in a quarantine hotel essentially. And when I say that change, that was kind of like the turning point for me, because it gave me the much needed time to just recharge. That hotel room had a tub, and when I say I spent so much time soaking in that tub, it is unreal. And being able to just do my own thing and be on my own for a bit and just not have to deal with anything, But more than that is actually where I really started to go through and kind of unpack some of the shit with my BPD and actually look at myself and essentially sit with myself. I had found a podcast for BPD called, I think it's From Borderline to Beautiful, and it's essentially the host has BPD and is in recovery and shit, and just essentially it's talking about how to go through and like the heavy shit, And when I tell you it was heavy, and I realized things about my past and about things I have done, be it unintentionally or without realizing it intentionally. It was not fun. But again, I sat with myself, and that was like the first time that I'd ever truly sat with myself. So, yeah. And then the second part of that was just going back to the what changed kind of deal thing. I met my girlfriend, my nesting partner. I am polyamorous, and I have a long-distance girlfriend who has actually, I've been with her now about 9 years. But my girlfriend, who I live with, we have been together for just over a year, and we met at the beginning of April in 2023. And when I tell you we were inseparable from split second, day one, we didn't start dating until we were in the kind of talking stage for 9 months, but essentially she is what changed. I had talked to her, I had asked her about looking for a place together, possibly, and we started looking for places together, And I am very much the type that I know what I have been through. I know what I can handle. But if there's somebody else in the situation with me, I refuse to put that person, as if I can help it, I refuse to put somebody else through the shit I've been through. So that kind of helped focus me a bit more instead of jumping, you know, because I had her as well to worry about, you know, to think of. But more than that, she was the one who essentially, literally, got me out of said friend's place. The one that I had essentially came up to stay with after my ex and my mom, you know? Yeah, 3 times we have tried to cohabitate together. All 3 times. It has ended not the best. But she is essentially the one who got me out. Like, I was so nervous, not about my friend specifically, but I'm very much the type that I don't like to see other people struggle, even to my own detriment, you know?
Right.
I have a very hard time saying no, even to my own detriment, you know? So she kind of was like, you know what? No. I can see that you're not okay here. This is not a good situation for you right now. Grab your shit. Let's go, essentially. You know? And so, yeah.
And that was a turning point for you?
One of, yeah. There was a few, but those were the 2 main ones, I guess you could say.
Yeah, totally. Could you say something about how you perceive that your experience of grief is different from somebody else's?
Well, like I said, with my grandma, it was all very much, what should I should be feeling this way. I should be reacting this way. You know, that overthinking kind of thought process. With my mom, it was kind of a weird mix of kind of numb, but also kind of, I was not okay. I was not okay. Not at all. And
how did not okayness show up?
Aside from, like, a major depression spike, which is to be expected in that situation, I was my mood swings with my BPD were heavily spiked, you know. I was very, I guess you could say, kind of numb 1 second and then screaming the next and then crying the very next, in a sense. You know, it was very mixed and it was very almost kind of whiplashy, you know. And I don't know how much of that is due to the fact that the BPD was still so new in concept with me, you know, in diagnosis, and I was still very much learning that end of things. But as a whole, it was not, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds intense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you have advice to somebody who is struggling with intense grief?
Let yourself be. Like, don't expect it to be one way or the other, or one specific way or the other. It's going to come out the way it's going to come out, and overthinking it is just going to make it worse. But on the flip side, keep the communication open. Whether it's venting to music, whether it's venting, screaming, when it hits, you gotta let it out, because otherwise it'll make it so much worse. You'll be numb and there might not be a way of pulling you back from it.
It's really good advice.
I know And this was kind of a double whammy for me because, again, with me and my ex too, my ex was one of the only other people in my life at the time that was very similar to my mom in that aspect, where it didn't matter, no matter what kind of deal thing. And my ex and my mom had several other similarities in the sense of random shit, They both smoked. They both heavily smoked. They both smoked the same fucking brand, like to a T. Like I had bought both my mom's cigs and my ex, the same exact thing, to a T.
Mm-hmm.
It's different similarities, things like that, different parallels. A huge double whammy for me. But there was a point in time, and this is more specific to my ex than my mom, but there was a point in time where I was genuinely questioning and scared as to whether or not I was going dark, so to speak, losing my humanity, so to speak. I don't know if you've ever seen Vampire Diaries. There is a scene where in the later season, and some of the later seasons, where the main character, Elena, has just lost her brother amongst several others in her past throughout the length of the show that up to that point. And she also had just recently been turned into a vampire and was very much struggling with the intensity of the emotions and the grief and all of it. And there's a scene where one of the other characters, his name is Damon, and he is a vampire as well. And he essentially is like, she's screaming, help, how do I make this go away, and he essentially compels her to turn off her humanity, to flip that switch. And
that's what that felt like for you?
I was terrified that I was going to end up going down that road. I was very terrified. Specifically,
I hear that. That sounds really scary.
Specifically with my ex, but...
Koda, thank you for sharing all of that. It's really beautiful to hear you talk about your experience and to really share that with me. I really appreciate that. I promised to my guests to try and steal less than an hour of your time. We had a little bit of a technological wobble, so we went a little bit long. But I would love to close this with the two questions I ask of everybody, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
What do you wish people knew about autism?
That just because somebody seems like they are functioning, and just because somebody is able to function on their own for the most part in the day-to-day doesn't mean they don't need support sometimes. And that can vary situation by situation, day by day even, and that's okay,
absolutely.
It's okay to need help going into a government office and asking a question. It's okay to be frustrated with the fact that you need that help. It's okay to be overloaded, and it's okay to be frustrated with the fact that you're overloaded, Yeah,
it all stacks, doesn't it?
Yep.
The final question I always ask my guests is, can you tell me of a time where you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
I think I would say my mom, but as I've said, that was just my mom as a whole. But situationally, I think the friend that I had mentioned about, we've known each other since 2010. We lost touch for about 4 years and got back in touch in 2014. we had been through very similar situations in our past with certain things, and I have some PTSD from what was supposed to be a therapeutic foster situation. It was anything but. They had been through something similar. Not exactly the same, but when we got back in touch, it was around the time whenever I was still dealing with massive PTSD issues from that experience of my own. And they are, to this day, the only person at this point in my life that I still have in my life that is my go-to whenever I have issues like that. If I have a flashback, or the rare times that I have issues with that anymore, all I need to say is one word, and they know.
Yeah. And so the right way to feel seen and loved in that moment is to just be received fully for who you are, basically.
And just not have to worry about explaining or, going through the entire situation over, right. Or just all I need to say is this one thing, and they immediately know what's going on.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really, really appreciate you and the way you talk about all this with such clarity.
Thank you for having me.